Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, John from MS Pitches. Ukraine War Frontline update for almost the 25th of October. So let's call it the 25th of October 2024. This is a daily update, as in I did one yesterday, and that's quite rare at the moment for me. So it's going to be interesting to see how much has changed only in one day. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the screen at the moment, pause the video. Before we look at the map, and as you can see, just a brief overview, no changes to the mappers in the Kursk regions, in the Kursk region and the Kharkiv regions there. So 3 areas, because there are 2 in Kharkiv, and 3 areas where there's no movement. That's, I think, interesting. It's become quite positional in Kursk, arguably, although there have been changes over the last day or so. But so that's interesting. But I want to actually talk about how, and it's a bit of speculation here, how relatively easy I think it is for, technically either side, if they had just enough troops in one area to break through the lines. These are huge, long front lines, and when we zoom in to any given area, and I'm randomly just going to come down here to say, I don't know, Robotina area, whatever it is, or actually let's go to somewhere a bit random, right? So somewhere between Myrna and Luhivska, right, on the Zaporizhia front line. And you think, and you come down here and you think, right, here's a tree line. Here's a bit of a tree line. And then you zoom out a little bit and the tree line goes on and on and on and on and on down there. And that's just one tree line. One long field in one small part of the entirety of the front line, right? And you come out and out and out and out and out. And you think, right, in order for there not to be a breakthrough there, from either side, I mean, this is relevant, just as relevant for the Russians as it is for the Ukrainians. But in order for one side not to break through there, you have to have troops pretty much stationed fairly much along there, right? And this is an area where there is no active sort of fighting in the sense that there is in, say, Pokrovsk. And so what do you do as a defensive side here? Or either side here? How many troops do you put in here into a place like this? And how many troops have you got in all? And if you're putting troops there to secure this really well, then is that a good use of your troops when you've got Pokrovsk, being really challenging, when you've got areas of, say, the Vuhledar front line, or over here, you've got all of these considerations right across the front line. And I personally think both sides are particularly brittle at the moment. Like, neither side is able to massively stock their front lines with troops and equipment. So therefore, there will be, main places where there are troop concentrations, of course. Pokrovsk, New York, Turetsk, Vuhledar, and then, Bakhmut, as in Chasiv Yar, Siversk, Serebryansky Forest, huge fighting consistently in there, all the way up and down this front line in the northeast. But then, you've got areas where there isn't much activity, areas between hot points. We haven't seen a lot of activity in this northern part of the Pokrovsk front line. We've not seen, it's been off and on in Siversk, but say in between Siversk and Chasiv Yar along here, it's been really relatively quiet. How many troops are you going to be stocking into each of these tree lines? Again, let's just randomly come down here and look at this area there with some fields, some woods, some gullies and whatnot. How many troops are going to be stocked here? If one side chooses to attack in a place, okay, drones mean that surprise attacks are going to be very difficult. But it is, I think, relatively easy to overcome the other side in any given position. And of course, if you're not doing that everywhere, it means that you as an attacking side don't have quite as many troops as you would like. But I think the idea I suppose I'm espousing is that it's relatively easy for the Russians to break through in a whole number of places, because you can't stock all of these front lines full of troops. And actually, if the Ukrainians had enough troops, they'd find it relatively easy to break through, at least in a minor way, because remember, there are going to be minefields all over the place and then major fortifications. But, some of these major fortifications are much further back here. If the Ukrainians decided to put a couple of hundred troops into here, they'd be able to break through. But they just don't have... Neither side, I don't think, has huge numbers of resources. I think both sides are dangerously brittle. And the Russians have been losing incredible numbers of pieces of equipment and troops consistently for quite a long time now. And I just think... I don't know. I just have this general sense that both sides are much closer to capitulation than we might otherwise think. And the Ukrainians are training up troops elsewhere, ready to bring them into the fray at some point. The Russians seem to be scrabbling together to find as many troops as possible. And they have got 10,000 troops from North Korea, which is a sign that they desperately need troops. Now, there are reports today that those troops have started to get to Kursk. So we are possibly just about to start seeing North Koreans fight in the Kursk region. But as to what I was saying, I mean, David D, take his claims with a huge pinch of salt, and he's often very bullish and very positive for Ukraine in a way that is not always justified. He says in the next 2 to 3 months, I think we are going to start to see some Russian units be disbanded due to a lack of troops and equipment. Right now, they do not have enough of either to keep them all of them manned. This picture is an example. Of course, a picture doesn't tell you particularly anything. It's just, a load of units here. That is the claim. I mean, we don't necessarily know that that's verified, and how. But I guess so. His point is that look how many units are around Robotyne. So this is the Robotyne area, down in the Zaporizhia area where the Russians attacked. So I've still got a problem with all the labels at the moment. I should be trying to sort that out in the next 24 hours. But just around this area, his point is that look how many units are supposed to be there. Now, in reality, is Robotyne going to be stacked with all those units, and how fully manned are they or not? Basically the Russians and the Ukrainians, are they both overcommitted? Yes. And are they stretched? Yes. What does this mean going forward? And then you have a claim like this. So David D, again, pinch of salt. At least 4 areas on the front are seeing a pushback on the Russian side due to Ukrainian counterattacks. It seems in all 4 areas, the main issues are no or little artillery and lack of troops in depth. Yes, a lack of artillery and troops in Russia. He says 2 areas in the north and 2 areas in the east where there are small but real gains. Now, exactly where, I mean, one of them is Turetsk, where the Ukrainians have been pushing back. Another area in the east, I don't know exactly where he's suggesting. And 2 areas in the north could well be Kursk area and on the border near to the Lipsy area in the Kharkiv Oblast. But, the point he's making is that the Russians are potentially overstretched. Now, we hear today, and sorry, there's a lot of analysis before we get onto the actual mapping here, but we hear today from a Ukrainian source that the Russians have a 2-to-1 artillery advantage, fire rate advantage, which is hugely diminished compared to what we saw earlier on just this year. It's 7-to-1. 7-to-1 to 2-to-1 suggests that the Russians are struggling for resources, and that means that they are going to find it harder to attack in a way that they have been used to. Now, you can argue they're replacing artillery with guided glide bombs, and that is a fairly decent point. But you've got Andrew Perpetua here talking particularly around Turetsk, where the Ukrainians have had a counterattack and had some success over the last couple of days. He said Ukraine has no motivation to talk about their counterattack in Turetsk. The Russians have no motivation to talk about it. OSINT has provided ample evidence to show it was successful. Analysts will not talk about it because it goes against their narrative of the infinitely powerful Russia. We're at the Russians helplessly flailing, trying to convince people that the evidence of the counterattack is somehow good for Russia stage. This is an interesting change of view here from Andrew Perpetua, who has traditionally been a bit of a doom and gloomer, but occasionally is quite boyish for, in terms of Ukraine's perspective going forward, and he has, I think, a macro view that's fairly similar to mine, which is very difficult for Russia to prevail. However, North Korea and China, that's long been my concern, is that Russia gets support from places that we either weren't expecting them or we're hoping it wouldn't come from, i.e. China. Now, as you can see, no change to the Kursk front line, but there is, quite a bit of talk about Russian successes around here, Ukrainian successes back over in this direction, as we saw yesterday. Interestingly, from the Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, this is my version on atpgeo.com. If you go up to the more and come down to the ISW Daily Report AI summary, the AI has summarized it into even more distilled, hopefully efficient text. Some notable anecdotes that are worth mentioning here. So a Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces are testing drone swarm technology near Chernihiv Yar, potentially to overcome Ukrainian electronic warfare systems. A Ukrainian military research expert revealed 3 distinct types of Shahid drones that are being used: Iranian-made, Russian-made, and those with Russian-made with imported Iranian components, and fully Russian-made, indicating a substantial increase in Russia's domestic drone production. I'd agree with that. And reports indicate that Russian military is coercing conscripts into contract service by issuing enlistment bonuses to those who never signed contracts, potentially highlighting recruitment challenges. And again, this last point goes towards the difficulties they are having in sustaining their war effort, and how thinly manned they must be, and that's why they're drafting in as many people as they possibly can. Anyway, that was from the ISW. So nothing really to report from Kursk today, and indeed from the Kharkiv Oblast as well. The ISW says of these areas, Kursk, both, this is though from yesterday, last night's report, so the day since then. This is basically what we reported yesterday. Ukrainians pushing back in Zeleny, Sharlak, and the Russians pushing in the Plakovo area, which is to the east of that salient. And then limited operations in the Kharkiv Oblast, no confirmed advances. So we move on to the northeast axis from Kupyansk here to Kreminna, to Selydove to Kreminna. And we have some small advances for the Russians, as according to Syriac maps, in just a lot along this road south of Stepova Novosilka. That's just in this what is now almost like a very large pocket. Of course, this was just straight down that northeastern axis previously, but now with what's happened in the Pischani direction, where the Russians really are knocking at the door of the Oskil River there's a danger that there's a sort of encirclement of this larger area, and it'd be interesting to see if they push both north and south there. There's also that pocket underneath the Pischani area too, north of Stomachivka. But anyway, no changes to the rest of that front line, no changes to the Serebyansky Forest and Seversk, and even the northern Bakhmut area and Chernihiv Yar. Chernihiv Yar is a bit of a worry because at least Syriac Maps has claimed that the Russians have made some fairly significant advances south of Chernihiv Yar, and indeed through the main part of Chernihiv Yar, but not yet verified by Andrew Perpetua's mapping. And then we have some gains for the Ukrainians here, as according to Syriac Maps, in the Turetsk area. And this has been quite widely reported over the last couple of days, possibly because it's something to cling on to that's positive for the Ukrainians amidst not very positive news along the front line. So geolocated footage, says no reports, confirms that Ukrainian forces have advanced and regained previously lost or disputed positions in the Zabalka district in Turetsk. So that's broadly this kind of central, south central part of Turetsk. So yeah, that's good news. And Grayscale here saying the same. Reports that the AFU's regained the centre of Turetsk there too. Yes, so good news for the Ukrainians there. But you can see from this map, actually this is probably worth having a look at. When you look at Syriac Maps, so you've got Andrew Perpetua's blue line comes down here. Syriac Maps has the Russians fully in control of this whole area. You've got that sporting arena up there. These sort of tailings heaps there. You've got the sporting arena there. So you've got this, the red line, the Russian defensive line, is much further back here. It's sort of back here for that particular mapper. You got those deeper grey buildings there, and the sports centre up there. So we go back here. These the sports centre up there, and that's around here. Actually, those. So it sort of goes up like that. So in other words, Surat Maps is an outlier as far as the map as we're concerning ourselves with. No reports is fairly similar, but of course they generally are very positive about what the Russians are in control of and take the Russian claims at their word. However, they do admit that here the Russians have been pushed back into Turetsk, whereas it says that they made these advances up in the New York area. So the Russian army had made new advances in the Sherbinivka, slowly approaching the centre of the town. On the other hand, the situation south of Turetsk city was clarified. In the last days, the Ukrainian army launched a series of successful counterattacks and managed to recapture a significant part of the Zabalka district. So a bit of a clarification there for him. It's not really clarified. It's they've done a counterattack and retaken that. That isn't we got it wrong, and actually there's evidence to suggest that they might be controlling that. No, they've pushed back. So anyway, that's good news for the Ukrainians in that particular area. No change to the northern part, the Kursk sector. And then sorry about the labels here. It's really not nice, but I'll be working, see if I can do a workaround to that. So as you can see, there are huge gains for the Russians, as according to both mappers really, but obviously much more positive for the Russians as far as Surat Maps is concerned. And this is Selydove. So Selydove is becoming, more and more, it's looking like the Russians are going to be in control of that fairly soon. It did hold out for a fair while. There were claims that the Russians had moved into it early doors, and then they were changed by Surat Maps. And I don't know if that was just poor mapping to begin with, or whether the Ukrainians counterattacked there. But now it does look like the writing's on the wall, and Selydove is under an immense amount of pressure, and the Russians are making those gains in that particular area. Then we come further to the south. We see that around, and this is, goodness me, we're already right down to Kurakova here and Kurakivka, but just north of Kurakivka in the area of Hrynik, isn't it? Hrynik. The Russians looking to have made some gains, but actually this is Andrew Perpetua broadly aligning with what Surat Maps had said previously, give or take. So it's not necessarily that the Russians have made all of these gains in one day, and making some gains according to Surat Maps, and in fact Andrew Perpetua as well, into Novosilka there, which is west of Hrynik. So gains in that neck of the woods, and putting extra pressure on this pocket of Ukrainian resistance there that's supposed to be pretty well defended. Kurakivka, that's what Greg Terry was saying the other night, is quite well defended by the Ukrainians there. So we'll see whether the Russians are going to be able to surround them at all there. So going back to, this is Selydove, where Surat Map says on the northern axis, the Russian troops have advanced through the dachas, forest lines, bread factory, as well as completely securing the Terekon, which is this heap, another spoils heap there. On the eastern side of the eastern axis, the Russian troops reached Naherna Street and began to storm the buildings of the 11th micro district. On the southern axis, the Russian troops took the cemetery, hangars, and the hospital area. About 35% of the town has been taken under Russian control. But anyway, that's Selydove that I'd already been to. But no individual maps from Surat Maps about the area north of Kurakova and Kurakivka. Then we had the Vuhledar area where the Russians just seem to be consistently moving to the west and northwest towards this town of Vuhledar, which seems to be kind of quite an important place, as in it's kind of stuck in the middle of all of these fields. But if they take that, then it might allow them to take a much larger chunk in general. In fact, you just think this whole area here is going to be open season for the Russians, but it just depends how many troops they have to be able to throw at the Ukrainians here. But then if the Ukrainians have very few people, these aren't all manned. When you look at maps like this, you can be forgiven for thinking, oh, the Ukrainians just must be littering all over the place. This is Ukrainian-run land, and therefore controlled land, and therefore they're in every single tree line. But, this is a huge amount of land, and if the Ukrainians are under a lot of pressure and are going to be operationally withdrawing, they're going to be moving back while the Russians are pressing forward, and it's just going to be very easy to take large amounts of land. And this is possibly why people are calling for, say, 500,000 people to be mobilized and whatnot, in order to make sure that the Russians can't take further land in the way that they are. But then, the Russians need just as many people to take that land too. Anyway, so Vuhledar area, the Russians are making gains there. And then finally, we come down to the Velika Novosilka sector, and this is the Levadne area I was talking about the other day. I'm pretty sure that Levadne's in there somewhere. There it is. Where I was saying that there was a bit of a mischaracterization, where when I was speaking to Tim White, if you remember, he was saying, the defences here are really poor, and it's a bit of a shocker. They should have been much better built. But I think I personally disagree with that, because the defences aren't going to be built on the contact line. The defences are all the way back here, so like 30 kilometres back, and they're the main defences. The Russians are easily going to be able to push through anywhere along the front line, really, on the contact line as it is at the moment, with relative ease, because they are just going to be sort of smaller trenches built in tree lines and in fields that aren't at all comparable to the much larger, huge zigzags of concrete bunkered trenches that exist much further back. It's the same up in the Kursk area, where you've had, I've gone way too far there, where you've had quite consistent advances by the Russians, and then suddenly it's kind of stopped here. Why is it stopped there? Because that's actually where the Ukrainian major defences are, running pretty much along that line there. And it's if those get breached quickly and easily, that's when you say those defences are bad. But I think in areas like this, it's not surprising that the Russians are going to break through if they put their mind to it. If they've got enough resources, it's just going to happen. Anyway, some relatively minor gains for the Russians in that Levadne area, in the Velika Novosilka sector. Anyway, that's enough from me, mainly just waffling on about how I think both sides are just pretty brittle. I don't know, let me know what you think. Am I misreading the situation? It's just, if you add another 100,000 to either side, then actually I think you could easily tip the balance. And this is what's so worrying about the North Koreans. If you're suddenly able to grab 10,000 soldiers like that, it's like 12,000 soldiers, suddenly throw them into a relatively small area. Like that's exactly what the Russians are going to need to try and take back more of Kursk. If they didn't have those 12,000 soldiers coming to Kursk, then the Ukrainians would have a much better chance of holding on to that area. Don't underplay the significance of just manpower for the Russians. That's how they succeeded in taking land for the entirety of this war. It's just throwing more people. It doesn't matter how well equipped they are. The North Koreans are used to being they are a militarized nation. So, this is definitely a challenge for the Ukrainians, and I think it needs to be taken really seriously by allied nations. So it's really good. I think the EU has come out today and been very strong in their sort of condemnation, but of course, words only go so far. Words need to be supported by action. So it's going to be interesting to see how the allies, how the US, the EU, UK, etc., react to the North Koreans being fielded and involved in the war properly. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in, say, the UN as well. But anyway, that's enough from me. You guys take care. Thanks so much for supporting. And actually, of course, I'm going to talk, just make sure. Oh, yeah, talking about the North Koreans here. So, I said that the news that they're in Kursk. North Korean troops have arrived in Kursk per the Ukrainian military intelligence. They estimate 12,000 in total are now in Russia. And of course, we heard John Kirby yesterday for the US saying that he still didn't know what they were doing. Well, I've got a pretty good guess. But there you go. Okay, for just to remind you that there is the NAFO campaign. We are so close to $30,000. It's an insanely awesome total that you guys have reached in a relatively short period of time, and it's just amazing. The community is awesome. Thank you to so many of you who have chipped in. Just to give you a sense of who some of those recent ones were: Mitchell, John, Alexander Haag, Jim, Frank Schultens, Mark Spivey, Marion Keys, Colin McKinney, Jane, Ian, Julian Roster, Monkey, Ole Nilsson, Anton Achin, Dave Morley, Rikak, John, Mark, Jenny Mokienko, Louise Foley, of course, Bryant Batala, and Michelle Thurl, Tanya Rindenko, Brett Golding, Linda, and Rosalind Miller, and Richard Bennett, of course, and all the others that I've previously said. So thank you for all those people who have added to that total. It's really awesome, heartwarming to see you guys pulled together. So thank you. Anyway, the link to that will be in the description below. Thanks for your support. Take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon.